Soft classical music hummed through the boutique as Amara trailed her fingers along a silk blouse, its price tag hidden discreetly beneath the collar. She didn't need to check it. She already knew it cost more than her monthly allowance. Across the room. Nancy Whitmore paused mid-conversation with a sales associate, her gaze narrowing as she watched Amara. What's she doing here? Nancy thought, her lips tightening. She smoothed her designer scarf and strode toward the girl, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Amara glanced up as Nancy stopped a few feet away, her posture rigid. "Can I help you find something?" Nancy asked, her voice sweet but edged with ice. Amara shook her head lightly. "Just looking, thanks." Nancy's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered over Amara's thrift store jeans and worn sneakers. "Are you lost?" she pressed, tilting her head slightly. "The mall's teen section is across the street." Amara's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm fine here." Nearby, a shopper pretending to browse scarves glanced over, her eyebrows raised. The sales associate hesitated, then busied herself rearranging a display. Nancy stepped closer, her perfume cloying. "This isn't your kind of store," she said softly, as if offering advice. Amara met her gaze, her hand still gripping the blouse. "My mom's picking me up soon." Nancy's smile faded. "I'll wait with you then," she said, crossing her arms. The air thickened as seconds ticked by. Amara's phone buzzed in her pocket, but she didn't reach for it. The classical music swelled, masking the tension until the boutique door chimed open. Nancy's heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she approached Amara, her forced smile tight and calculated. The boutique's soft classical music hummed in the background, but the tension between them cut through it like a knife. "Are you lost?" Nancy asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Amara turned slowly, her calm gaze meeting Nancy's sharp stare. She didn't respond immediately, her unspoken judgments unsettling Nancy more than any words could have. Nancy tilted her head slightly, her smile faltering as she took in Amara's worn sneakers and thrifted jeans. "This isn't your kind of store," she added, her voice lower now, but no less pointed. Amara's fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. She glanced at the silk blouse she had been admiring moments ago, then back at Nancy. "I'm just looking," she said quietly, her tone neutral but firm. Nancy let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head as though amused by Amara's response. "Looking?" she repeated, stepping closer. "Well, if you're not planning to buy anything, maybe you should look somewhere else." Nearby, shoppers exchanged glances but said nothing, their unspoken judgments complicit in the unfolding scene. The sales associate shifted uncomfortably behind the counter, pretending to adjust a display of handbags. Amara didn't move, her posture steady despite the weight of Nancy's words. Pressing down on her, her voice remained calm. "I'm waiting for my mom." Nancy raised an eyebrow, smirking faintly. "Sure you are," she replied, her tone thick with disbelief. The boutique fell silent again, except for the faint hum of music and the clicking of Nancy's heels as she stepped back slightly, watching Amara like a hawk circling its prey. Nancy's voice rose slightly, cutting through the boutique's soft classical music. "If you're not going to buy anything, you need to leave," she said firmly, her tone sharp enough to draw the attention of nearby shoppers. Amara stood still, her face composed, but her hands tightening around the strap of her bag. She glanced briefly at the silk blouse she had been admiring before meeting Nancy's gaze directly. "I'm waiting for my mom," she replied softly, her voice steady but restrained. Nancy smirked, crossing her arms as if she had caught Amara in a lie. "Sure you are," she said, her words dripping with condescension. The boutique seemed to hold its breath as the tension between them thickened. A shopper near the scarves section glanced over but quickly turned away, pretending to focus on the display. The sales associate froze mid-step, her eyes darting between Nancy and Amara before lowering to the floor. She had faced moments like this before, at school, at restaurants, even walking down the street, but no matter how many times, it happened The sting of being judged never faded completely. Nancy stepped closer, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "I'm just looking out for the store," she said loudly enough for others to hear. "We have policies about loitering." Amara's jaw tightened slightly, but she didn't respond. Her silence seemed to frustrate Nancy further, who leaned in as though daring Amara to react. The boutique door chimed softly as someone entered, but neither Nancy nor Amara turned toward it. The air felt heavy with unspoken tension, hanging in the space between them like a storm waiting to break. Nancy's accusations hung in the air, sharp and cutting, as if they had sliced through the boutique's soft classical music. The room fell silent, the hum of conversation and clicking heels suddenly absent. Shoppers exchanged uneasy glances, their eyes darting between Nancy and Amara. No one spoke. A woman near the jewelry counter adjusted her scarf unnecessarily, pretending not to notice the tension. The sales associate froze behind the register, her hands hovering over a stack of receipts she had been organizing moments ago. Amara shifted slightly but didn't back down. Her quiet dignity was palpable, the calm in her posture contrasting starkly with Nancy's escalating frustration. She had learned to hold her ground in moments like this, not with loud words or defiance, but with unspoken judgments that spoke, louder than anything she could say. Nancy's voice broke through again, louder now as she tried to fill the uncomfortable quiet. "I don't think you understand," she said, her tone brittle but forceful. "This store has policies about who can linger here." Amara glanced at her briefly before returning her gaze to the blouse she had been admiring earlier. Her silence was deliberate, a refusal to engage with Nancy's assumptions and prejudice. The boutique door chimed softly again as someone entered, but neither Nancy nor Amara turned toward it. The tension in the room was too thick to be broken by anything as simple as a door opening. Though Nancy's words were loud and insistent, it was Amara's calm presence that commanded attention now. The shoppers who had been complicit in their unspoken judgments began to feel the weight of their inaction. The boutique door chimed softly, but Nancy didn't turn. Her gaze was fixed on Amara, her frustration simmering just beneath the surface. "I'm going to need you to prove you're not here to cause trouble," Nancy said, her voice sharp and commanding. Amara's grip on her bag tightened, but she didn't flinch. "I told you," she said quietly, her tone steady. "I'm waiting for my mom." Nancy opened her mouth to respond, but another voice cut through the tension, calm, firm, and unmistakably authoritative. "Is there a problem here?" Nancy froze, her shoulders stiffening as she turned toward the door. Judge Olivia Williams stood just inside the boutique, her presence commanding without effort. She was dressed in a tailored blazer, her posture straight and composed. Her eyes swept over the scene, taking in Nancy's flushed face and Amara's quiet resilience. "Who are you?" Nancy asked, her voice faltering slightly. Olivia stepped forward with measured steps, the sound of her heels echoing in the now silent room. "I'm her mother," she said simply, her tone carrying a weight that made Nancy take an involuntary step back. The sales associate behind the counter straightened immediately, her eyes wide with recognition. A shopper near the scarves section pretended to browse but couldn't help glancing at Olivia with curiosity and unease. Nancy stammered, trying to regain control of the situation. "I was just making sure everything was in order," she said weakly. Olivia raised an eyebrow, her gaze steady and unyielding. "And what exactly about my daughter made you think things weren't?" Nancy opened her mouth but found no words. The room seemed to hold its breath as Olivia's question lingered in the air. The office fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Nancy leaned against her coworker's desk, her smirk sharp and practiced. Maria, a Latina woman in her 30s, kept her eyes on her computer screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "You're lucky to have this job," Nancy said casually, tapping Maria's nameplate with a manicured nail. "Not many people would hire someone with your background." Maria's hand stilled, but she didn't look up. "I earned this job," she replied evenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Nancy chuckled, crossing her arms. "Of course you did," she said, her tone sweetly condescending. "But let's be honest, you wouldn't even be here if they weren't filling quotas." Maria's jaw tightened, but she forced a thin smile. "I'll keep that in mind," she murmured, clicking her mouse absently to open a meaningless file. This wasn't the first time Nancy had made comments like this. Over the years, she'd perfected the art of masking cruelty as concern, weaponizing civility to belittle those she deemed beneath her. Nancy lingered for a moment, savoring the discomfort she'd created before sauntering back to her own desk. Maria waited until she was gone before letting her smile drop, her shoulders slumping slightly under the weight of another unspoken insult. Years later, Nancy sat alone in her dimly lit living room, scrolling through the viral video of her confrontation with Amara. The memory of Maria's forced smile flickered in her mind, but she pushed it away, until a comment beneath the video stopped her cold. "She's done this before." Nancy's smirk faded as she stared at the screen, her coffee mug trembling in her hand. The hallway was alive with the sound of lockers slamming and sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Amara walked quietly, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Around her, whispers floated like smoke, thin but suffocating. "Why's she in honors math?" a boy muttered to his friend, loud enough for Amara to hear. "She probably got special treatment," his friend replied, smirking as they passed her. Amara's jaw tightened, but she didn't react. Years of subtle digs and whispered judgments had taught her how to keep walking, how to let the words roll off her shoulders even when they stung. She reached her classroom and stepped inside, the whispers fading as the door clicked shut behind her. The teacher glanced up briefly before returning to the attendance sheet in front of her. "Amara," the teacher said suddenly, without looking up. "You're presenting today, right?" Amara nodded, pulling a neatly printed report from her backpack. "Yes?" The teacher scanned the room distractedly before moving on to another student. "Actually, let's skip yours for now," she said quickly. "We're running behind." Amara froze for a moment before sliding the report back into her bag. She didn't argue. She never did, but the tightness in her chest grew heavier as she sat down at her desk. They weren't loud or obvious, but they added up over time, shaping how Amara moved through spaces that were meant to include everyone, but often didn't feel like they did. As the teacher called on another student, Amara stared at her report, wondering if it would ever be seen. The boutique was silent now, the soft hum of classical music drowned out by the weight of tension. Olivia stood tall, her presence commanding without effort. Her voice cut through the stillness like a blade. "What exactly did my daughter do that made you so uncomfortable?" Nancy stammered, her confidence faltering for the first time. "She was lingering," she said, her words brittle and uncertain. Olivia raised an eyebrow, her gaze steady and unyielding. "Lingering," she repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the air. The store manager shifted awkwardly behind the counter, his hands fidgeting with a stack of receipts. "We don't tolerate discrimination," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact with Olivia. Olivia's sharp glance landed on him, her expression calm but piercing. "Then why did you let it happen?" she asked evenly. The manager's cheeks flushed, and he looked down at his hands, his silence louder than any defense he could muster. Nancy's loud accusations had filled the room moments ago, but now it was Olivia's quiet restraint that commanded attention. Shoppers who had been complicit in their unspoken judgments began to feel the weight of their inaction. Nancy tried, again her voice cracking slightly. "I was just looking out for the store," she said weakly. Olivia stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. "By targeting my daughter?" she asked, her tone sharp but controlled. Nancy opened her mouth to respond but found no words. The boutique seemed to hold its breath as Olivia's question lingered in the air, unanswered. The boutique was still, the tension thick enough to choke. Nancy's voice rose again, sharp and defensive. "I'm just looking out for the store," she snapped, her words cutting through the quiet like glass shattering. Amara stood motionless, her grip tightening on the strap of her bag. "I'm waiting for my mom," she said calmly, her voice steady despite the weight pressing down on her. Nancy scoffed, shaking her head as though Amara's composure was an affront. "You don't belong here," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Across the room, a bystander shifted uncomfortably, their phone slipping discreetly from their pocket. They angled it carefully, capturing Nancy's sharp tone and Amara's quiet dignity in stark contrast. The recording began without a sound, just a lens watching as the scene unfolded. It wasn't just about Nancy and Amara anymore, it was about every unspoken judgment, every microaggression disguised as concern, every instance of exclusion that had gone unnoticed or unchallenged until now. Nancy stepped closer to Amara, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "If you're not buying anything, you need to leave," she said firmly. Amara didn't flinch, her voice was soft but unwavering. "I told you, I'm waiting for my mom." The bystander's phone captured everything. The sharpness in Nancy's tone, the calm resilience in Amara's response, and the unspoken judgments of everyone else in the room who chose not to intervene. Hours later, the video would surface, online with a caption that read, "Black excellence meets white fragility," and within minutes it would begin to spread. Nancy sat stiffly at her kitchen table, her coffee mug trembling slightly in her hand. The glow of her phone screen illuminated her face as she scrolled through the video that had gone viral overnight. Amara's calm voice echoed in the recording, "I'm waiting for my mom." Nancy's sharp reply followed, "You don't belong here." The caption beneath the video read, "Black excellence meets white fragility." The comments poured in faster than Nancy could read them. "This happened to me last week at a cafe. She's a child, for God's sake. Hold her accountable." She had always believed her actions were protected by the system she operated within, a system that rewarded people like her for looking out for spaces they deemed their own. But now that system was crumbling under the weight of public outrage. Her thumb hovered over the screen as she refreshed the page again. The view count had skyrocketed to hundreds of thousands. Each time she scrolled, new comments appeared, sharper and louder than before. Nancy's breath quickened as she read one comment that struck deeper than the rest. "She's done this before. How many others has she humiliated?" Her coffee mug slipped from her hand, spilling across the table as she scrambled to clean it up. The sound of ceramic scraping against wood filled the quiet kitchen, but Nancy barely noticed. Her mind was racing with questions she didn't want to answer. The phone buzzed again with another notification. Another share, another comment, but Nancy couldn't bring herself to look at it anymore. For the first time, she felt what it was like to be judged by a world that refused to stay silent. The boutique was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Olivia stood near the counter, her gaze fixed on the store manager, who fidgeted nervously with a stack of receipts. Nancy lingered nearby, her confidence visibly shaken. Olivia's voice broke through the silence, calm but cutting. "You said your store doesn't tolerate discrimination," she began, her tone measured. "So why did you let it happen?" The manager's hands froze mid-motion. He glanced at Olivia briefly before lowering his gaze to the counter. We don't condone this kind of behavior," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "Condoning and tolerating aren't the same thing," Olivia replied sharply, her eyebrow arching slightly. Her words hung in the air like a challenge no one wanted to face. Nancy shifted uncomfortably, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I was just looking out for the store," she interjected weakly, trying to regain control of the conversation. Olivia turned toward her slowly, her expression calm but piercing. "By targeting my daughter?" she asked evenly. Nancy opened her mouth to respond but faltered under Olivia's unwavering gaze. She looked to the manager for support, but he remained silent, his shoulders slumped under the weight of his complicity. The authority Nancy and the manager had wielded so confidently minutes ago now felt fragile and exposed under Olivia's quiet restraint. The shoppers who had been complicit in their silence began to exchange uneasy glances, their discomfort growing as they realized they had witnessed something they could no longer ignore. Olivia stepped closer to the counter, her voice steady but firm. "You failed your customers today, and you failed your staff." The manager said nothing. The living room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Young Amara sat cross-legged on the floor, her notebook open in front of her, but her pencil lay untouched. Her eyes were fixed on Olivia, who sat on the couch, flipping through a stack of papers. "Mom," Amara said softly, breaking the silence. Olivia glanced up, her expression softening as she noticed the hesitation in her daughter's voice. "What is it, sweetheart?" Amara hesitated, then asked, "Why do people stare at us?" Olivia set the papers aside and leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees. "When do they stare?" she asked gently. "At the store," Amara replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "At school sometimes. Even when we're just walking." She paused before adding, "It feels like they don't want us there." Olivia's chest tightened at the weight of those words. She had always known this moment would come. The moment when Amara would start noticing the quiet ways the world tried to make her feel small. But knowing didn't make it any easier. She smoothed Amara's hair gently, her hand lingering for a moment before speaking. "Some people fear what they don't understand," Olivia said softly. "And sometimes that fear makes them act unkind." Amara looked up at her mother, confusion mixed with sadness in her eyes. "But we didn't do anything wrong." Olivia smiled faintly, her voice steady but firm. "No, we didn't," she said, "and we never will. But we don't shrink for them, Amara. We stand tall and we keep walking." Amara nodded slowly, her pencil moving across the page again as Olivia watched quietly. Nancy stood in her bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink. The faint hum of the overhead light filled the silence as she stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "I was just being cautious," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling slightly. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time. "I was just doing my job." Her reflection didn't respond. It stared back at her, unblinking, its expression hard to read. She had always been able to justify her actions before, to herself and to others. But now, under the harsh glare of public scrutiny, those justifications felt hollow. She straightened her posture and practiced a smile, tight but polite. "I didn't mean anything by it," she said aloud, as though rehearsing for an audience. That wasn't there. "I was just looking out for the store." The words sounded wrong even as she said them. Her reflection seemed to mock her, its smirk eerily familiar. The same smirk she had worn in the boutique when she confronted Amara. Nancy's hands gripped the sink harder as a memory surfaced unbidden. Maria, years ago in the office, forcing a smile as Nancy told her she was lucky to have a job. Nancy had thought nothing of it at the time, but now that same smirk haunted her in the mirror. Her voice cracked as she tried one last time. "I'm not racist." The silence that followed was deafening. Nancy's reflection didn't argue. It didn't need to. The weight of everything she had done pressed down on her like a stone, and for the first time she couldn't look herself in the eye. The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, it had been shared across every platform, the caption, "Black excellence meets white fragility," sparking conversations that couldn't be ignored. Amara's calm voice echoed in living rooms, offices, and classrooms. "I'm waiting for my mom." Nancy's sharp retort followed. "You don't belong here." It wasn't just about this one moment. It was about every time someone had been told, subtly or overtly, that they didn't belong. The hashtag #ShakarRetailWhileBlack trended globally within a day. Stories poured in under the tag. A teenage boy denied entry to a prom dress shop because he looked suspicious. A black woman followed in a grocery store, asked repeatedly if she needed help. A father turned away from a car dealership despite perfect credit. The collective outrage became a roar. Comments flooded the video. "This happened to me last week." "How? Many more times does this have to happen? She's just a child." Nancy sat frozen in her living room, her phone glowing in her trembling hand. She scrolled through the endless stream of comments, her heart pounding as she read words like racist and bigot. Each one felt like a blow, chipping away at the confidence she had once worn so easily. The world she had always believed would protect her was now turning against her. Friends who had laughed at her jokes were silent. Co-workers who had once nodded along avoided her calls. And yet the voices of strangers grew louder. "We won't stay silent anymore." The hashtag wasn't just a trend, it was a movement. The boutique's corporate office released a statement the next morning. It was brief, vague, and carefully worded. "We are aware of the incident involving one of our customers and are conducting an internal investigation. We do not tolerate discrimination in any form." They weren't meant to address the problem, they were meant to quiet the noise. But this time, the noise wouldn't be silenced. Olivia sat at her dining table, her laptop open in front of her. The video of Nancy confronting Amara played on one side of the screen, while an email chain from a former boutique employee filled the other. Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line as she read the messages. Complaints about racial profiling ignored, reports of discriminatory behavior dismissed as misunderstandings. She forwarded the emails to her legal team with a single sentence: "Let's make this public." Hours later, screenshots of those emails flooded social media. One line stood out, repeated in post after post: "We'll handle it internally." The public's fury grew louder. Nancy sat in her car outside the boutique, staring at her phone. The corporate statement had done little to shield her. If anything, it had made things worse. The comments beneath the company's post were relentless. "Handle it internally? That's code for do nothing." This isn't just about one employee. It's systemic. "We're done shopping here." Inside the boutique, the manager paced nervously as Olivia walked through the door. She approached him calmly, her voice steady but firm. "Your silence allowed this to happen," she said simply. The manager opened his mouth to respond but found no words. His silence spoke louder than any excuse ever could. Nancy's phone buzzed incessantly on the kitchen table, notifications flooding in faster than she could swipe them away. The video played on loop. Amara's calm, "I'm waiting for my mom," juxtaposed with Nancy's sharp, "You don't belong here." The caption read, #RetailWhileBlack. Comments scrolled like a tsunami. "This happened to me at 12. Hold. Her accountable. She's Karen. Not a hero." Nancy's hands trembled as she gripped her coffee mug, the liquid inside sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Her reflection in the dark screen showed a woman unraveling, a far cry from the confident smirk she'd worn in the boutique. She had always believed her actions were justified, even noble. But now the world saw her as she'd never seen herself, a bully hiding behind false civility. Her phone buzzed again, a text from her sister. "What the hell were you thinking?" Nancy didn't reply. Instead, she clicked on a news article titled, "When Vigilance Becomes Prejudice." Her face stared back from the thumbnail, frozen mid-sneer. Flashback. Weeks earlier, Nancy had laughed with friends over wine, dismissing a story about racial profiling as overblown. "People are too sensitive," she'd said. Back in the present, Nancy's breath hitched as she scrolled further. A tweet with thousands of likes read, "This is why my daughter carries pepper spray." The coffee mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the tile floor. Nancy didn't move to clean it up. The room buzzed with quiet anticipation, the hum of cameras and murmured conversations filling the air. Olivia stepped up to the podium, her tailored blazer crisp under the bright lights. She adjusted the microphone slightly, her movements deliberate and calm. Nancy sat frozen in her living room, her TV tuned to the live broadcast. The video of her confrontation with Amara played in a corner of the screen, looping endlessly. Her reflection trembled faintly in the glass coffee table as she leaned forward, gripping her phone tightly. Olivia's voice broke through the tension, steady and composed. "This isn't just about my daughter," she began, her words measured but sharp. "It's about every child who has been made to feel like they don't belong." The crowd erupted in applause, their claps echoing like a verdict. Olivia waited patiently for the noise to settle before continuing. "It's about systems that reward exclusion and silence those who dare to challenge them." Nancy's breath hitched as she watched Olivia speak with quiet authority. For years, Nancy had believed she was untouchable, a protector of spaces she deemed hers. But now, under Olivia's calm scrutiny, that belief crumbled. A reporter raised his hand and asked pointedly, "Judge Williams, what do you hope to achieve from this?" Olivia met his gaze directly. "Accountability," she said simply. "Not just for individuals, but for institutions that allow prejudice to thrive unchecked." Nancy's phone buzzed with another notification, more comments flooding in beneath the viral video. She couldn't bring herself to read them anymore. Her reflection in the TV screen seemed smaller now, overshadowed by Olivia's commanding presence. The sharp knock at the door echoed through Nancy's quiet house. She froze mid-step, her coffee mug trembling in her hand. Through the frosted glass, she could see silhouettes, multiple figures waiting outside. She set the mug down carefully and opened the door just enough to see them. Reporters stood clustered on her porch, microphones in hand, cameras pointed directly at her. "Mrs. Whitmore," one reporter said sharply, stepping forward, "why did you target a child in the boutique?" Nancy's throat tightened. I didn't target anyone," she stammered, her voice cracking under the weight of their stares. Another reporter pressed in, his tone sharper. "Are you racist, Mrs. Whitmore?" Nancy's eyes darted between them, searching for an escape. "I was just concerned," she croaked weakly. The reporters exchanged glances, their silence louder than any accusation. She had always relied on polite excuses to shield herself from accountability. Phrases like "just being cautious" and "looking out for others." But now those excuses felt flimsy and exposed under the harsh scrutiny of public judgment. Behind her, a neighbor peeked through their blinds, watching the scene unfold. Nancy turned briefly toward them, hoping for some semblance of support. Instead, the blinds snapped shut abruptly, leaving her alone on the porch with the reporters' relentless questions. "Do you regret your actions?" one reporter asked pointedly. Nancy opened her mouth but found no words. Her silence stretched on as the cameras captured every flicker of discomfort in her expression. The reporters didn't leave immediately. They lingered like shadows on her doorstep, their presence a reminder that this moment wouldn't disappear quietly. The boutique's social media page posted a statement early that morning. The font was clean, the words carefully chosen. "We regret the incident that occurred in our store and are committed to ensuring all customers feel welcome. We are conducting an internal review to address this matter." They weren't meant to take accountability. They were meant to placate the public, to quiet the outrage without addressing the root of the problem. Olivia sat at her desk, her laptop open to the boutique's statement. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she scrolled through the comments beneath it. An internal review? That's code for do nothing. This isn't just about one employee. It's systemic. "We're done shopping here," she clicked on another tab where her legal team had compiled emails from former employees. The messages painted a damning picture. Complaints about racial profiling ignored, reports of discriminatory behavior dismissed as misunderstandings. One email stood out: "We'll handle it internally." Olivia forwarded the emails to her media contact with a single sentence: "Make these public." Hours later, screenshots of those emails flooded social media. The boutique's attempt at damage control backfired spectacularly as the public's fury shifted from Nancy to the system that had protected her. Nancy sat in her car outside the boutique, staring at her phone screen. The corporate statement had done little to shield her. If anything, It had made things worse. The comments beneath the post were relentless. This store has been enabling this behavior for years. It's not just one person, it's a culture. Inside the boutique. The manager paced nervously as Olivia walked through the door. She approached him calmly, her voice steady but firm. Your silence allowed this to happen. The boutique's name was trending again, but this time, it wasn't. Just the video of Nancy and Amara fueling the outrage. A former employee had posted a confession on social media, her words raw and unfiltered. Nancy did this weekly. Managers never stopped her. The post included details of incidents that mirrored Amara's experience. A black woman followed. Through the store, a Latina teen asked to prove she could afford the handbag she admired. The employee's caption read, "I stayed silent too long, not anymore." The video resurfaced with new context and comments tripled overnight. People who had once dismissed the incident as an isolated case now saw it as part of a larger pattern, a culture of exclusion that had gone unchecked for years. Nancy sat in her living room, scrolling through the post with trembling hands. Her name was mentioned repeatedly in the comments. She's been doing this for years? How many people has she humiliated? Fire her and the managers who let it happen. Nancy's breath quickened as she read one reply that struck deeper than the rest. This isn't just about her, it's about everyone who stayed silent. Years ago, Nancy stood in the boutique, watching as a coworker confronted a black customer over loitering. Nancy had smirked but said nothing, believing it wasn't her place to intervene. Back in the present, Nancy's chest tightened as she realized she wasn't just being judged for what she had done, but for what she hadn't stopped. The former employee's post ended with a simple call to action. Silence is complicity. Speak up. Nancy stood in her bathroom gripping the edge of the sink. The faint hum of the overhead light buzzed above her, but she barely noticed it. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman unraveling under the weight of her own actions. I'm not racist, she whispered to herself, her voice trembling slightly. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time. I was just being cautious. Her reflection didn't respond. It stared back, unblinking, its expression hard to read. For years she had convinced herself that her actions were justified, that she was protecting spaces that needed protecting. But now, under the harsh glare of public scrutiny, those justifications felt hollow. She straightened her posture and practiced a smile, tight but polite. I didn't mean anything by it, she said aloud, as though rehearsing for an audience that wasn't there. I was just looking out for the store. The words sounded wrong even as she said them. Her reflection seemed to mock her, its smirk, eerily familiar, the same smirk she had worn in the boutique when she confronted Amara. Nancy's hands gripped the sink harder as a memory surfaced unbidden. Maria, years ago in the office, forcing a smile as Nancy told her she was lucky to have a job. Nancy had thought nothing of it at the time, just another offhand comment meant to assert control. Her voice cracked as she tried one last time. I'm not racist. The silence that followed was deafening. Nancy's reflection didn't argue. It didn't need to. The weight of everything she had done pressed down on her like a stone, and for the first time, she couldn't look herself in the eye. The press conference room was packed, the air buzzing with anticipation. Olivia stood at the podium, her hands resting lightly on its edges. The cameras flashed, but she didn't flinch. Her voice, calm and steady, cut through the noise. This isn't just about my daughter, she began, her gaze sweeping across the room. It's about every child, every person who has been made to feel like they don't belong in spaces meant for everyone. The audience leaned in as she continued. We cannot keep pretending that these incidents are isolated. They are symptoms of a larger issue, a system that rewards exclusion and punishes those who dare to challenge it. Nancy sat at home, watching the broadcast on her TV. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. Olivia wasn't just speaking about Amara, she was speaking about people like Nancy, about the systems that had protected her for so long. Olivia paused briefly before delivering the announcement that would ripple across industries. Today, I'm launching an equity initiative aimed at transforming how businesses operate, how they hire, how they train, and how they treat their customers. The room erupted into applause. Olivia waited for it to settle before adding, "No child should fear spaces meant for everyone." Nancy's phone buzzed with notifications as retail chains began pledging support for Olivia's initiative. The boutique's stock plummeted within hours, its name trending alongside hashtags like "Jar Accountability Now" and hashtag "Retail While Black." They weren't just a call for change. They were a demand, and this time, the world was listening. Nancy stepped out of her front door, the morning air crisp and quiet. She carried a small trash bag in one hand, her steps slow and deliberate. The neighborhood felt different now, quieter, colder. As she walked toward the curb, she glanced across the street at her neighbor's house. The Black Lives Matter sign in their window caught her eye, its bold letters standing out against the soft glow of the morning sun. Her neighbor, an older woman with gray-streaked hair, stood in her yard, watering plants. Nancy hesitated, for a moment before raising her hand in a tentative wave. The woman looked up briefly, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met for a fleeting second before the neighbor turned away, adjusting the angle of her hose. The spray of water hit Nancy's shoes, soaking them slightly. For years she had walked these streets with confidence, believing herself respected and even admired by those around her. But now every glance felt like judgment, every silence was like rejection. Nancy set the trash bag down beside the curb and stood there for a moment, staring at the damp spots on her shoes. She wanted to say something, to explain herself, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. Her neighbor finished watering and walked back inside without another glance in Nancy's direction. The door shut softly but firmly behind her, the sound echoing louder than any confrontation could have been. Nancy turned back toward her house, her steps heavier than before. It wasn't anger or shouting that cut through Nancy. It was silence, deliberate and unyielding. Nancy's phone glowed in the dark living room, casting harsh shadows on her face. Comments scrolled endlessly. "Karma's a bitch." "Racist Karen." Her thumb hovered over the delete account button, trembling. Just shut it off, she told herself. But she couldn't stop scrolling. A video auto-played. Amara's calm voice. "I'm waiting for my mom." Nancy's own sneer filled the screen, frozen in time. She had always believed her actions were justified, even noble. Now, the world saw her as a villain, and she couldn't unsee it. Her phone buzzed, a notification from a news article. "When vigilance becomes prejudice." Her face stared back from the thumbnail, mid-sneer. Flashback. Months earlier, Nancy had laughed with friends over wine. "People are too sensitive," she'd said, dismissing a story about racial profiling. Back in the present, Nancy's breath hitched as she read a comment. "This is why my daughter carries pepper spray." The phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the coffee table. She didn't pick it up. Nancy adjusted her scarf nervously as she stepped into the brightly lit living room. The hum of conversation and soft clinking of glasses filled the air, but the moment she entered, the noise seemed to dim. "Hey, Nancy." A woman greeted her with a tight smile, her tone polite but distant. Nancy smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. She scanned the room for familiar faces, friends she had shared countless brunches and charity events with. But no one met her gaze directly. She approached a small group near the fireplace, their laughter cutting off abruptly as she neared. "Hi," Nancy said, her voice carefully cheerful. One of them nodded quickly. "Oh, I need to grab another drink," she said, slipping away without looking back. The others murmured excuses and followed, leaving Nancy standing alone. These were people she had considered allies, confidants. But now, their silence felt louder than any confrontation could have been. She moved toward the buffet table, pretending to browse the hors d'oeuvres. A man she knew well passed by without stopping, his eyes flicking toward her briefly before turning away. Nancy's chest tightened as she realized what was happening. They weren't outright rejecting her. They were erasing her. She placed her untouched glass of wine on the table and slipped out, quietly, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor of the empty hallway. For years, Nancy had thrived in these spaces, confident in her place among them, but now that confidence was gone, and so was their acceptance. The seminar room was quiet, the air heavy with discomfort. Employees sat stiffly in rows of chairs, their eyes fixed on the screen at the front of the room. A video played, its narrator, explaining microaggressions in retail spaces. Assumptions based on appearance lead to exclusion and harm. Nancy sat near the back, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She avoided eye contact with anyone, her gaze fixed on the corner of the screen. For years, Nancy had operated under the belief that she was protecting spaces like this boutique. But now those beliefs were being dismantled in front of her. The trainer paused the video and turned to face the group. "Inclusion starts with accountability," she said firmly, her gaze sweeping across the room. The manager shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hands fidgeting with a pen. He avoided looking at Nancy but glanced briefly at Olivia, who sat calmly in the front row. Olivia's presence was quiet but commanding, her posture straight as she took notes. A packet was distributed to each employee, new hiring policies printed, in bold font. Nancy flipped through hers quickly, her fingers trembling slightly as she read phrases like bias training mandatory and diversity quotas prioritized. The trainer continued, her tone steady but sharp. "This isn't just about avoiding bad press. It's about creating spaces where everyone feels welcome." Nancy's jaw tightened as she felt Olivia's gaze land on her briefly before returning to her notes. The boutique was no longer a space Nancy controlled. It was becoming something she didn't recognize. As the session ended, Nancy lingered, in her seat, staring at the packet as though it weighed more than paper should. The boutique's entrance gleamed in the morning light, freshly polished for the unveiling. A small crowd gathered outside, murmuring quietly as they waited. Olivia stood near the door, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression calm but resolute. A brass plaque was mounted beside the entrance, covered by a velvet cloth. The store manager stood awkwardly to the side, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. He avoided Olivia's gaze, his discomfort palpable. Olivia stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "This space has been a symbol of exclusion for far too long," she began. "Today it becomes something else, a place where everyone belongs." With a single motion, she pulled the cloth away, revealing the plaque beneath. The words etched into it were simple but powerful. "This space welcomes everyone." For a moment there was silence. Then, one by one, people began to clap. The sound grew louder, filling the air with a sense of hope and renewal. Amara stood, beside her mother, her fingers brushing lightly against the plaque. This wasn't just about reclaiming a space. It was about transforming it into something better than it had ever been before. A young black woman paused to read the plaque as she entered the store. She smiled faintly before walking inside, her posture relaxed in a way that suggested she felt welcome here for the first time. Olivia placed a hand on Amara's shoulder as they watched shoppers move in and out of the boutique. "This is just the beginning," Olivia said softly. Amara nodded, her gaze lingering on the plaque as sunlight reflected off its surface. The kitchen was quiet, the faint sound of the kettle whistling in the background. Amara sat at the table, stirring her tea slowly, her gaze fixed on the swirling liquid. Olivia sat across from her, her posture relaxed but attentive, waiting for Amara to speak. "You didn't just stand up for me," Amara said finally, her voice soft but steady. She looked up at her mother, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something deeper, understanding. "You stood up for everyone like me." Olivia's lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes glistened with emotion. She had fought hard to protect Amara from moments like the one in the boutique, but she knew she couldn't shield her forever. Moments like these were inevitable, but they could also be transformative. "I did what I had to do," Olivia replied quietly, her voice carrying the weight of years spent navigating spaces that tried to push her out. "And one day, you'll do the same." Amara's fingers tightened around her mug as she absorbed those words. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she admitted, her tone hesitant. Olivia leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady and reassuring. "You're stronger than you think," she said firmly, "and you don't have to do it alone." The room felt lighter suddenly, charged with purpose and quiet determination. Amara wasn't just a child being protected anymore. She was becoming someone who could stand tall in the face of adversity, just like her mother. Amara nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth as she lifted her mug to take a sip. Nancy sat on her living room floor, a dusty photo album spread open in front of her. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a nearby lamp. Her fingers traced the edges of an old photograph, a charity gala from years ago. She was laughing, her arm draped around Rachel, her closest friend. She had always seen herself as someone who belonged in spaces like these, someone respected, admired. But now those spaces felt distant, and the people who had once filled them were silent. She flipped to another page. A ski trip with coworkers, a girls' night out with wine glasses raised high. Each photo captured moments of joy and camaraderie, but now they felt hollow. Nancy's finger lingered on one image, Rachel laughing at a joke Nancy had made. Months earlier, Rachel had chuckled softly as Nancy made an offhand comment about a black cashier fumbling with change. "They're always so slow," Nancy had said with a smirk. Rachel hadn't disagreed, but she hadn't defended the cashier either. Back in the present, Nancy's chest tightened as she realized how much had changed since then. Rachel hadn't called or texted since the video went viral. None of her friends had. Her phone buzzed beside her, but she didn't pick it up. The people who had once laughed at her jokes were now distancing themselves quietly, but deliberately. Nancy closed the album and leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling as the silence pressed down on her. The boutique felt different now, warm, inviting. Amara stood near the fitting rooms, her hands lightly resting on a rack of dresses. A young girl, no older than 13, stepped out hesitantly, clutching a shimmering blue gown. "Do you think it's too much?" the girl asked nervously, her voice barely above a whisper. Amara smiled faintly, shaking her head. "It's perfect," she said softly. "You deserve to feel like you belong here." The girl's face lit up, her posture straightening slightly as she turned back toward the mirror. For years, spaces like this boutique had been places of exclusion for people like her. But now, under Olivia's leadership and Amara's quiet guidance, they were transforming into spaces of empowerment. The store manager lingered near the counter, watching the interaction from a distance. His discomfort was evident. He wasn't used to seeing moments like these unfold in his store. Amara crouched slightly to meet the girl's gaze in the mirror. "You know," she said gently, "when I was your age, I didn't think I'd ever feel welcome in a place like this." The girl turned to look at her directly. "What changed?" she asked curiously. Amara glanced toward the plaque mounted near the entrance. "This space welcomes everyone." Her smile grew slightly as she replied, "People stood up and made it happen." The girl nodded slowly before turning back to admire herself in the dress again. She wasn't just reclaiming spaces for herself, she was helping others do the same. As the girl walked back into the fitting room, Amara stood tall, her quiet strength filling the boutique. The early morning light spilled through the kitchen window, casting a golden glow across the table. Olivia sat with her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, her gaze fixed on the city skyline beyond. The world outside was waking up, but the house was still quiet. She took a slow sip, her thoughts drifting to the events of the past weeks. The confrontation in the boutique, the press conference, the changes that had begun to ripple through the community, all of it had been exhausting, but necessary. Her eyes flicked toward the refrigerator, where a flyer for Amara's youth council meeting was pinned with a magnet. The words "Future Leaders" were printed boldly at the top. A faint smile tugged at Olivia's lips as she thought of her daughter. How she had stood tall in moments that could have broken her, how she had found her voice in the face of silence. Change begins when silence breaks, Olivia whispered to herself, her voice steady but soft. She set her mug down and leaned back slightly, letting the warmth of the sunlight wash over her. The road ahead was long, and systemic change wouldn't happen overnight. But moments like these, moments where voices were heard and spaces were reclaimed, were proof that progress was possible. The camera panned slowly to Amara's bedroom door, where a poster hung with bold letters, "Future Leader." The room beyond was quiet, but Olivia could picture her daughter inside, preparing for another day of advocacy and growth. Olivia exhaled deeply and took another sip of coffee, her resolve quietly solidifying as the city came alive outside. Nancy stepped out of her front door, the trash bag swinging lightly in her hand. The morning was crisp, the air carrying the faint scent of dew. She glanced around the neighborhood, hoping for some semblance of normalcy. Across the street, her neighbor stood in her yard, watering a bed of flowers. The bright Black Lives Matter sign in the window behind her caught Nancy's eye, its bold letters impossible to ignore. Nancy hesitated for a moment before raising her hand in a tentative wave. "Good morning," she called out, her voice forced into cheerfulness. The neighbor paused mid-spray, looking up briefly. Their eyes met, for a fleeting second before the woman turned back to her flowers without a word. The hose shifted slightly, and a stray spray of water splashed Nancy's shoes. For years, she had walked these streets with confidence, exchanging pleasantries with neighbors who smiled warmly at her. But now those smiles had vanished, replaced by silence that felt heavier than outright rejection. Nancy set the trash bag down by the curb and lingered for a moment, staring at her damp shoes. She wanted to say something, to explain herself, to defend herself, but no words came to mind. The neighbor finished watering and walked back toward her house without another glance in Nancy's direction. The door shut softly but firmly behind her, the sound echoing louder than any confrontation could have been. Nancy turned back toward her own house, her steps slower than before. It wasn't anger or shouting that cut through Nancy. It was deliberate silence, a quiet judgment she couldn't escape. The morning news played softly in Olivia's living room, the anchor's voice calm but charged with significance. 3 major retail chains have announced new equity policies following Judge Olivia Williams's initiative, he said. These changes include mandatory bias training, diverse hiring practices, and public accountability measures. Amara sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Headlines flashed across her screen, from viral shame to systemic change, and retail industry faces reckoning after Watchus Retail While Black movement. She glanced at her mother, who was sipping coffee at the dining table, her expression thoughtful, but composed. The boutique had been just one piece of a larger puzzle, a microcosm of systemic exclusion that stretched far beyond its walls. But now, the ripples of change were reaching places she hadn't imagined. Amara's phone buzzed with a notification. She opened it to see a message from the youth council she had joined. "We'd like you to speak at the next meeting about your experience and how it inspired change." She hesitated for a moment before looking at Olivia. "They want me to talk," she said softly. Olivia set her mug down and met Amara's gaze. "You should," she said simply. "Your voice matters." Later that day, Amara stood at a podium in a small community center, addressing a room filled with young activists. Her voice was steady as she spoke about reclaiming spaces, about finding strength in moments of exclusion. Amara wasn't just inspired by change, she was becoming part of it. As applause filled the room, Olivia watched from the back, her smile faint but proud. The ripples were growing, and this was only the beginning.